A high-powered CEO walks down a freezing alley on Christmas Eve, then stops dead. Between the dumpsters, a tiny girl shivers in an oversized coat, one shoe missing, frost clinging to her lashes. When she whispers, "Sir, I just wanted to find my mom," his entire world shifts. What happens next will redefine everything he thought he knew about family, loss, and second chances. Liam Carter wasn't taking that alley to change his life. He just wanted to avoid the holiday crowds between his office and the parking garage. The cold air burned his lungs, but his mind still cycled through tomorrow's presentation slides. Q4 projections, merger rumors, all the usual corporate noise. Then movement. Not the rats he expected, but fabric rustling near the farthest dumpster. At first glance, he mistook the shape for discarded laundry. Then he saw the breath puffing invisible clouds. A child. Small knees pulled to chest, one. Bare foot tucked beneath her. The oversized coat swallowing her frame, the missing shoe. The way frost sparkled on her eyelashes like tragic glitter. These details registered before she did. She blinked up at him with eyes too old for her face. His first thought, boardroom tactics won't work here. When she spoke, her voice carried the raw scrape of someone who'd been crying silently for hours. "Sir," she whispered, "I just wanted to find my mom." The words hit like a sucker punch. CEOs describe crisis moments later, how time distorts, how instincts bypass training. Liam later told no one about dropping his briefcase in the slush, about his fingers fumbling with his scarf. The wool was cashmere, monogrammed, worth more than his first car. As he wrapped it around her shoulders, he noticed three things. The coat she wore smelled like antiseptic. Her left wrist had a hospital bracelet, and her shivering came in violent waves. His phone call to 911 lasted 47 seconds, recorded later, as evidence. The dispatcher asked standard questions: location, condition, was there visible trauma? Usually Liam prided himself on crisp articulation under pressure. Here, on the third query, his voice cracked on the word hypothermia. First responders found him kneeling in dirty snow, his suit pants ruined, cradling the girl like he'd done it before. Later, they'd confirm she'd walked 3 miles from the county hospital following Christmas lights, that she'd last eaten from a vending machine 14 hours prior, that her mother had been admitted as Jane Doe after collapsing in a bus station. But in that moment, as the ambulance swallowed the small form wrapped in his scarf, Liam only knew one thing: this wasn't over. The EMTs worked efficiently, thermal blankets, glucose gel, questions the girl answered in nods. They assumed he was family until the paperwork started. That's when Liam realized he didn't even know her name. Ella. A nurse read from the bracelet, checking vital signs. The girl's fingers clutched his sleeve as they loaded the gurney. A detective arrived, took notes, eyed Liam's Rolex with suspicion. Standard procedure when an unattended child gets involved with a stranger. But when they asked Ella who he was, she murmured something that made the cop step back. The words would later appear, in the report underlined twice: "He smells like my daddy's coat used to." As the ambulance doors closed, Liam stared at the alley, at the single child's shoe left behind near the dumpster. His driver asked if he wanted to follow the ambulance or go home. The right answer should have been obvious. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the object Ella had pressed into his hand moments earlier, a folded photograph, corners softened from handling. The face looking back at him wasn't the girl's, but the writing on the back was in his late wife's handwriting, a date from 15 years ago, the same date their daughter had been born and died. The ambulance siren wailed like a living thing, drowning out the medic's questions. Ella's answers came in whispers, her numb lips barely moving. "Don't talk to strangers," she recited when they asked why she hadn't sought help earlier. The words sounded rote, something repeated to her so often it had become a chant, yet she'd let Liam lift her from the alley without protest, her body curling trustingly against his chest. Contradictions that made the paramedic exchange glances. Liam knew his corporate demeanor well, the practiced calm, the measured speech. But the weight of Ella against him had bypassed all that. She fit the hollow of his arm exactly as Max had years ago, before growth spurts and teenage defiance. No boardroom training covered this. Each bump in the road made her grip his shirt, her fingers locking like she'd vanish if she let go. She described following the lights above stores when prompted, her logic heartbreaking in its simplicity. More lights meant more people. More people meant someone might recognize her mom's blue jacket. The paramedic shone a pen light into her pupils, checking for concussion while Liam watched her bruised feet swing centimeters above the gurney. His Patek Philippe, usually a power symbol, ticked uselessly against her pulse point as he checked. Her wrist. Trauma rewires a child's brain. This he knew from the company's pediatric hospital donations. Rules become survival. Patterns become scripture. Ella alternated between unsettling stillness and sudden tremors, like her body couldn't decide between shutdown and panic. When she murmured, "Mommy's coat buttons are smiley faces," Liam's hands betrayed him first. The shake traveled up from his fingertips, foreign and unwelcome. The ambulance hit a pothole. Ella gasped, and for one awful second her eyes glazed with something beyond fear. Recognition. Later he'd learned this was how she looked during night terrors. But in that moment, frozen under the ambulance's flickering light, she whispered 5 words that unraveled him. "Your tie is inside out." A CEO's armor is precision. Custom suits, knotted ties, the illusion of control. That morning, dressing in the dark to avoid waking Max, he'd fumbled the knot. No one at the office had dared mention it. But this child, half frozen and barely coherent, noticed. The mundanity of it, that she'd seen him more clearly in 5 minutes than his staff had in years, made his throat tighten. She flinched when they braked hard. Reflexively, Liam cupped the back of her head, his palm brushing matted hair. The gesture surprised them both. "Hold on to me," he said. And she did. Not like a businessman, but like a father. The medic raised an eyebrow at the blood pressure. Cuffs reading. Stress responses don't discriminate by tax bracket. When they wheeled her into the ER, Liam's polished loafers stuck slightly to the disinfectant slick floor. A nurse called out, "New Jane Doe in Bay 3, probable stroke," and Ella went rigid. That jacket description, navy with smiley face buttons, matched perfectly. The way her small hand shot out to grip the gurney rail had nothing to do with hypothermia, and everything to do with primal recognition. Paperwork appeared. Insurance fields, contact lines, all the bureaucratic machinery that separates those who belong from those who don't. Liam hesitated only a second before writing his personal number. The pen left an ink smudge on his thumb, dark as the alley shadows where they'd met. He didn't know yet about the woman in Bay 3, about the photo in Ella's pocket, about the 15-year gap between loss and this improbable intersection. But when the triage nurse said, "You can wait in family lounge," Ella's head whipped toward him. No words. Just a look that held entire conversations. His nod was slight, almost imperceptible. Enough. The automatic doors hissed open. Somewhere beyond them, a woman in a blue jacket fought to wake up. Somewhere beyond that, Max would be wondering why his dad missed their Christmas Eve tradition. And right here, in this fluorescent-lit hallway, a CEO stood holding a cafeteria napkin because Ella had needed something to wipe her nose. The hospital lights were too bright, the kind that showed every scuff on the floor and every shadow under Ella's eyes. She looked even smaller on the gurney now, swallowed by starch-white sheets. A nurse flipped through pages on a clipboard, crisp and efficient. "Unidentified female, mid-30s, possible stroke," she recited. "No ID found. Blue coat, smiley face, buttons." Ella's entire body jerked like she'd been shocked. "That's her coat." Her voice cut through the beeping machines. "That's Mommy's." The nurse paused mid-sentence, glancing between the child and her notes. Medical staff see countless unidentified patients. It's routine. But there's no protocol for the way a child's recognition hits. Ella's fingers clawed at the thin hospital blanket, her knuckles white. Liam watched the nurse's professionalism falter for half a second before she reset. "You're sure, sweetheart?" Ella didn't answer with words. She just pointed down the hall like her mother might walk through the doors any second. Hospital policy says no unconfirmed identifications, but policies don't account for the way a child knows her mother's coat in the dark. Every year, thousands arrive at ERs with no name, no history, just vitals and guesses. Liam's brain automatically cataloged the inconsistencies. Why was a mother admitted alone? Where were the friends, co-workers, anyone who might have noticed? Her missing? The cardiac monitor in the distance kept a steady rhythm, each beep counting down to something. Ella reached suddenly for the nurse's pen. No asking, just a determined grab, like possession might make the truth stick. The nurse hesitated, then handed it over. On the back of an intake form, Ella started drawing, not the stick figures of a typical child, but urgent, jagged lines. A face took shape. Liam leaned in before he realized he was holding his breath. The sketch was crude but unmistakable, round, cheeks, a mole near the left eyebrow, hair pulled back tight. Ella stabbed the pen at the paper when she finished, leaving an ink blot on the forehead. "Mommy," she said, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Nurses talk about how kids draw what matters, not what's accurate. This wasn't a portrait. It was a map to someone Ella loved. The charge nurse took the drawing without comment, but Liam saw the way her grip tightened. Jane Doe's become someone's daughter, someone's mother. The second a connection is made. He imagined the woman in Bay 3, alone, unidentified, while her child shivered in an alley. How many steps between them now? How many locked doors and bureaucratic hurdles? A resident pulled back the curtain then, glancing at his tablet. "We've got a possible match to county records," he said, too clinically. Hannah Wills, brought in by bus station staff after collapse. No emergency contacts listed. The name meant nothing to Liam. But Ella whimpered like she'd been struck, her whole body curving toward the sound of it. That's when the social worker arrived with her folder of release forms and custody paperwork. "Are you family?" she asked. Liam, pen poised. He opened his mouth to explain, to say he was just a stranger who'd found a child in an alley. But Ella's hand latched onto his sleeve. Her grip was stronger than it should have been for someone so small. "That's my daddy," she said, clear as anything. The lie hung there, bold and impossible. The social worker's eyebrows lifted. Liam should have corrected her. Should have said something about legalities, about protocols. But all he could see was Ella's drawing still clutched in the nurse's hand, the face of a woman who might never wake up to see her child again. Then the charge nurse returned. Her expression changed. "Found this in the Jane Doe's coat pocket," she said, holding out a sealed envelope. The paper was creased but clean, as if it had been handled carefully for a long time. The handwriting on the front wasn't Ella's, wasn't Hannah's either. Liam knew that slant, those looping E's. He'd seen them on grocery lists, on anniversary cards, on the last note his wife ever wrote him. His fingers went numb before he even touched the envelope. 15 years since he'd seen that writing. 15 years since the night his daughter was born. The stamp on the back was dated the same day. The envelope was creased along the edges but preserved with care, the way people keep things that matter too much to throw away but hurt too much to display. Liam's fingers stalled mid-reach when he saw the handwriting on the front. That slanted T, the looping I. He didn't need to read the name to know. Claire's handwriting hadn't changed in 15 years because Claire hadn't aged a day. The scent hit him first when he turned the envelope over. Not the antiseptic hospital smell clinging to Hannah's coat, but something beneath it. Jasmine and bergamot. The ghost of his wife's perfume clinging to the paper. The flap opened with a soft crackle, the adhesive brittle with age. Inside, a single sheet of stationery, the same heavy ivory stock Claire used for shopping lists and love notes. The ink had faded slightly where someone, Hannah presumably, had touched it often. "Thank you for holding my hand when I thought I was going to lose my daughter," it began. The date stamp matched the worst night of Liam's life, the night their daughter Lily was born 2 months early. The night Claire bled out in delivery while Liam stood helpless in a corner, his corporate connections useless against the sudden crimson bloom on the sheets. The letter wasn't addressed to him. Claire had written to Hannah, the delivery nurse, who'd stayed 3 hours past her shift, who'd held Claire's hand when Liam was barred from the OR. "You told me to focus on her face," Claire wrote, her pen's pressure uneven in spots where tears must have fallen. "That's how I knew she had my mother's chin." A detail Liam had forgotten, how newborns' features mirror ancestors in fleeting ways before changing. Hannah had kept this for 15 years. Through job changes, through whatever life events left her collapsing in bus stations with no emergency contacts. The envelope showed no address. Claire must have handed it to her directly. A final act of gratitude from a woman who wouldn't live to see morning. Liam's knees pressed into a hard hospital chair he hadn't realized he'd taken. The social worker was speaking, something about temporary custody paperwork, but the words blurred. He focused instead on the ink smudge near the letter's edge. Claire used to get frustrated when her pens bled. Under his thumb, the paper still held the slight warp from whatever moisture had touched it long ago. Tears? Rain? He'd never know. "Ella's." Small voice cut through. "That's my mommy's paper." Liam turned to see her pointing at the stationery with uncanny certainty. Not recognition. No child remembers stationery from infancy, but the instinct kids have for important objects. "She keeps it in her special box," Ella added, as if this explained why her mother had letterhead matching a dead woman's. The nurse shifted uneasily. Trauma bonds patients and caregivers sometimes, yes. But for Hannah to keep this letter all these years, to carry it with her like a talisman, for the two of them to reunite under these circumstances, even the social worker paused mid-signature. Liam touched the letter's last line. "I'll never forget how safe you made us feel." The handwriting grew shakier there, the downward strokes less controlled. Claire wrote this in recovery, already weakening. He could almost see Hannah tucking it into a pocket, making a promise to a dying woman she'd likely never see again. Now here they were, the nurse, her child, and the widower, bound by paper thin enough to tear with a careless movement. The cardiac monitor down the hall beeped faster suddenly. A code call went out, not for Hannah, but close enough to send. Staff rushing. Ella whimpered, grabbing Liam's sleeve with the same reflexive trust she'd shown in the alley. As he smoothed her hair, he noticed the photo was still in his pocket, the one Ella had given him earlier. He pulled it out carefully, turning it over, not Claire, not Hannah either. A newborn's face, red and wrinkled, swaddled in a hospital blanket. The date stamp matched the letter, a Polaroid, the edges yellowed but the image clear. On the back, 2 lines of writing, one in Claire's hand, one in another woman's. The first read, "Our Lily." The second, penned years later in different ink. Promise kept. Down the hall, machines whirred around Hannah. They'd have questions about the letter, about why a childless CEO recognized a Jane Doe's nurse. Liam stared at Ella, at the stubborn set of her chin that looked nothing like Hannah's. That looked exactly like Claire's mother in old photographs. Max would be texting soon, wondering where his dad was on Christmas Eve. Max arrived with his sketchbook tucked under one arm and his usual hoodie, but nothing else about this was normal. Hospital lighting did no favors for teenagers. It sharpened the angles of his face, made the wary set of his shoulders more pronounced. Their Christmas Eve tradition had been Chinese takeout and terrible holiday movies, not ICU waiting rooms with strangers' children. Ella was dozing against a stack of pillows when he walked in. The storybook on her tray table, Goodnight Moon, Hospital Edition, made Max stop short. "You used to read me that," he said, not quite to Liam. His finger hovered near the book's edge like he might touch it, then reconsidered. Kids remember rituals more than toys. The exact cadence of a parent's voice reading certain lines, the way certain pages smelled after countless bedtime turns. Ella stirred, her lashes fluttering at the sound of a new voice. Max's sketchbook wasn't for class assignments. He carried it everywhere, filled with subway riders and cafe regulars. What he pulled out now wasn't the urban sketches Liam was used to seeing. This was a charcoal rendering of last night's alley, all smudged shadows and stark angles. The composition centered on one thing: Liam carrying a small figure wrapped, too big in a coat. The way Max had drawn his father's posture, slightly hunched, protective, bore no resemblance to boardroom photos or magazine spreads. Adolescent art bypasses pretense. The rough strokes exaggerated Ella's frailty, made Liam's grasp both tender and desperate. A doctor paused by the door, caught mid-stride by the image. Max didn't seem to notice. He was studying Ella with an artist's focus, the way her fingers curled around the blanket hem, the hospital bracelet sliding loose on her wrist. "Will you keep her?" The question came quiet, almost to his sketchbook. Max didn't look up when he asked it, just shaded. Another line. Liam had fielded hostile takeover bids with more warning. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the pause that followed. The truth was, no corporate merger had ever made his palms sweat like this. CEOs rehearse earnings calls. They don't rehearse explaining to their teenage son why a freezing child in an alley suddenly matters more than holiday plans. Liam reached for the discarded storybook instead of answering immediately. The spine creaked when he opened it. Hours old, already loved half to death. "She reminds me of you," he said finally, smoothing a page Ella had dog-eared. Not the whole truth, but a start. The Lily's angel ornament still went on their tree every year. The Polaroid in his pocket right now, newborn Lily swaddled, Hannah standing guard in scrubs, burned against his ribs. Max absorbed this with the same quiet intensity he gave everything. His next sketch came faster, looser lines, fewer details. Just Ella's face this time, sleepy but alert, watching him draw with growing interest. When she leaned forward to see better, her IV tugged. Max caught the tubing before it could pull, his reflex quicker than the nurse's. "Hey," he said, handing her the sketch. "You keep this one." The casual offering, no fanfare, just two kids and a piece of paper, belied the significance. Ella took it carefully, tracing the lines with one finger. Then she did something Liam hadn't seen yet. She smiled. Not a polite hospital smile, but a real one, crinkling the corners of her eyes. Max's ears turned pink. He rubbed at a charcoal smudge on his thumb, suddenly fascinated by his shoelaces. "It's not great," he mumbled. But the way Ella held the drawing, close to her chest like something precious, suggested otherwise. Down the hall, monitors started a new chorus. A nurse hurried past, calling something about responsiveness. Through the glass, Liam saw Hannah's bed surrounded by staff. Ella sat up straighter, sensing the shift. Max's hand hovered near her shoulder. Not touching, just present. The sketch lay between them on the sheets, still slightly smudged at the edges. The first gift between siblings is rarely perfect. Just necessary. 3 floors up, Hannah's fingers began to move. The ICU monitors kept their steady rhythm, mechanical lullabies that had played for days without variation. Then at 3:17 p.m. on Christmas Day, one sensor picked up the change first. Hannah's eyelids didn't snap open like in films. They fluttered, weak as moth wings against glass. The nurse at the station noticed the EEG shift before the alarms could sound, her coffee cup hitting the counter with a slosh. Ella sensed it before any machine. She'd been tracing Max's sketch with one finger, the charcoal line smudging slightly under her touch. Her head jerked up so fast her braid whipped against the pillow. No one had told her coma patients often wake to familiar voices. She just scrambled forward instinctively, bare feet sliding on hospital tiles. Her IV pole wobbled as she stretched toward the bed, her entire body inclining like a plant toward weak winter sun. The textbook term is positive tropism. In that moment, it looked like love. Hannah's hand twitched first. Not the random spasms of before, but a deliberate curl of fingers. The nurse moved to intervene, then paused. Coma patients don't reach for things unless they mean to. When Hannah's palm found Ella's small hand, the grip was weak but unmistakable. A tether more than a touch. Neurologists would later note the statistical improbability. The stroke's location should have required weeks of rehab just to track objects visually. Yet Hannah's eyes found Ella's face first, pupils dilating as they focused. The heart monitor accelerated, not the frantic spike of distress, but the steady climb of recognition. Liam stood frozen near the door, Max's shoulder brushing his. He'd witnessed boardroom coups, hostile takeovers, the moment CEOs realize they've lost control. None of it compared to watching a stranger's face morph from confusion to raw, unguarded relief at the sight of their child. Hannah's lips moved, without sound. Ella leaned close enough that her braid grazed her mother's cheek. Whatever word formed, it made Ella clutch harder at Hannah's gown. Then Hannah's gaze shifted. Past the nurses, past Max hovering uncertainly with his sketchbook, directly to Liam. His expensive coat was still draped over Ella's chair, the same one he'd wrapped around her in the alley. Their silent exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. No one else would notice the slight nod Hannah gave, the way her fingers tightened fractionally around Ella's. But Liam felt the shift like a door creaking open after years stuck shut. Medical staff swarmed then, checking vitals, adjusting lines, speaking in the quick jargon of crisis averted. A resident kept repeating, statistically remarkable, while the social worker eyed the odd group clustered around the bed. Most Jane Does wake to empty rooms. This one woke to a CEO in wrinkled dress shirt, a graffiti-sneakered teenager, and a child clutching both a handmade drawing and a fistful of hospital blanket like she'd never let go again. The nurse found the envelope later, the one with Claire's letter. It had fallen to the floor during the commotion, landing face up near Liam's shoe. Hannah's eyes tracked it when the nurse held it aloft. The look that passed between them then wasn't gratitude. Exactly. It was the quiet understanding of two people who'd loved the same woman in different ways, across impossible gaps of time. Max broke the silence first. "Here," he said, thrusting his sketchbook at Ella. The page showed a rough drawing of their odd quartet. Hannah in the bed, Ella clinging to her hand, Liam and Max on either side like mismatched bookends. Not art, just proof. Ella studied it solemnly, then pressed it into Hannah's limp fingers. Hannah's thumb moved first, stroking the paper's edge. Her voice, when it came, was wrecked from days without use. "You kept your promise," she rasped. Not to Liam. To Claire, 15 years gone but suddenly present in every crease of that letter, every stroke of Max's charcoal. Outside, snow began falling. Soft, persistent flakes that coated the ambulance bay where this began. The parking attendant would later remark how strange it was. The CEO, the kid, and the nurse all standing under the ER awning watching snow collect on dumpsters. No one ran for cover. They just stood there, letting it dust their shoulders, turning their scars into something almost beautiful. Hannah spoke for the first time 2 days after waking. Her voice came out shredded from disuse, but the words were clear. She named the hospital, the same one where Claire had died, the same one where she'd worked pediatric night shifts for 15 years. The admission drained what little color she'd regained, leaving her hands shaky against the sheets. Those hands had swaddled newborns, held the wrists of teenagers after suicide attempts, written countless charts. Now they struggled to lift a plastic water cup without spilling. The blue coat hung on the chair where Ella had placed it like a sacred relic. Up close, Liam saw the inner tag, last season's discount chain logo, the $19.99 price slashed to $7.50 in red marker. When Hannah reached for Ella, her sleeve rode up, showing a pharmacy wristband from 2 weeks prior. Tier 3 formulary, the print read. The copay for that category usually meant choosing between prescriptions and groceries. Hannah caught Liam looking. Her explanation came haltingly, each word measured against the pain it cost to admit. The jacket had been her winter splurge when a respiratory infection sidelined her for a week without pay. The missing buttons, replaced with smiley faces from a craft bin, weren't decorative. Original ones had popped off during late-night washes at the laundromat. Ella's winter boots sat by the bed now, new ones Liam had security deliver yesterday. Hannah touched the toe of one, her fingers lingering on the waterproof lining. Last year, she said with clinical detachment that somehow made it worse. We used bread bags inside her sneakers when it snowed. The statistics floated in Liam's head unbidden. Average nurse salaries, medical debt ratios, how many healthcare workers qualify for food assistance in the city. His penthouse coat closet flashed to mind. Bespoke wool never worn twice, a vicuña overcoat with the tags still on. The disconnect wasn't theoretical anymore. It had frostbitten toes and an IV line taped to a thin arm. Ella climbed onto the bed with the natural ease of children who've spent half their lives in hospital chairs. She traced the dark circles under Hannah's eyes, the way kids catalog parental weariness without understanding its roots. Why are you crying? The question was matter-of-fact. Hannah lifted a hand to her own cheek, seeming surprised to find moisture there. Parents hide distress from children, instinct as old as time. But the truth came out anyway, shaped around the edges for small ears. Because we're not alone anymore. The words broke something open in the room. Studies show children raised in poverty develop tells, little behaviors that betray constant financial calculation. Ella had them all. The way she folded used tissues into squares for reuse. How she eyed the untouched Jell-O cup like it might vanish if she blinked. Liam watched her tuck a stray bread roll into her pocket absently, a habit born from meals that couldn't be counted on. For the first time, he truly saw the alley scene through Hannah's eyes. A single mother collapsing at work, a child setting out alone through snowfall to find help. The desperate calculus that made an alley seem safer than waiting. The social. Worker arrived with discharge papers, her pen clicking officiously. Standard questions about permanent addresses spun into awkward silence. Hannah's old apartment had been lost to missed rent during her hospitalization. The motel before that, not suitable for children, the report noted, had condemned months prior. Ella hummed quietly against Hannah's shoulder, oblivious to how close they'd come to separation by the system her mother worked in. A folded sheet lay on the bedside table. Max's sketch of their unlikely quartet. Hannah studied it with a nurse's assessment, clinical even now. Then her fingers found Ella's, threading together like stitches holding fabric. Not a dramatic gesture, just proof of what mattered when everything else fell away. The hospital gift shop Christmas music filtered in, tinny and bright. Somewhere beyond these walls, people exchanged gifts wrapped in foil paper. Here, the only presents were a clearance rack coat with mismatched buttons and a child's fistful of hospital blanket, held tight. Max appeared in the doorway then, bearing 2 paper cups, hot cocoa from the cafeteria, the cheap powdered kind. He set one carefully in Ella's lap, the other near Hannah's IV line. Not charity, not pity, just warmth passed hand to hand, as basic as breath. Max arrived on Christmas morning bearing a lumpy package wrapped in a hospital towel, the edges twisted into makeshift folds. The nurses had given him odd looks when he requested an extra hand towel, not the usual wrapping paper for holiday gifts. Inside lay a stack of printer paper stapled together, each page filled with rough sketches and handwritten words. The title page read, "The Girl Who Followed the Lights," with Ella's face rendered in Max's distinctive style, all exaggerated proportions and messy charcoal shading. Ella peeled back the towel slowly, her fingers tracing the first illustration. There she was, small and determined, walking beneath glowing storefronts with one shoelace untied. Max had drawn every scene he'd heard about, the alley, the ambulance, even Hannah's hospital room. Art therapists often use storytelling with traumatized children, a way to reframe uncontrollable events into manageable narratives. What Max created wasn't professional therapy, just a raw retelling that made the unthinkable feel survivable. The pages rustled as Ella turned them, her mouth forming silent words along with the text. She paused at the drawing of Liam wrapping his scarf around her, then touched her neck as if remembering the wool's scratch. Max hovered nearby, picking at a loose thread on his hoodie sleeve. His usual confidence faltered when Ella reached the last page, a future scene he'd imagined rather than witnessed. 4 figures stood beneath a lopsided Christmas tree, their outlines softened with blending stumps. Liam recognized that hesitant hope on Max's face. It matched the expression he'd worn years ago when first holding his infant sister. The same mix of awe and fear at being entrusted with something fragile. When Ella whispered, "Big brother," the words barely audible, Max's entire posture changed. His shoulders straightened like he'd been handed a title heavier than any honor roll certificate. Hannah watched from her hospital bed, tracking the exchange with a nurse's quiet assessment. The tears on her face weren't dramatic, just steady, silent streams that followed the contours of her cheeks. Social workers would later document this moment as pivotal, though nothing official happened. Just a boy, a girl, and a stack of papers that felt more binding than any court order. Ella scrambled onto the bed beside Hannah, the makeshift book clutched to her chest. "Look," she said, pointing to Max's signature at the end, an elaborate scrawl taking up half the page. "He's my real brother now." Max's ears burned crimson under his beanie. The statement landed with the certainty of a child who'd decided the matter was settled. In the year ahead, psychologists would note how Ella carried the book everywhere, how the spine split from constant reopening, how she added her own crayon edits over time. A family formed not through shared blood but through shared story, the way people have done for centuries. That first version remained crude, the alley dumpsters drawn too large, Liam's features barely distinguishable. But the essentials were there, the cold, the fear, the moment when solitude cracked open to let light in. The discharge nurse arrived with paperwork, her clipboard ready for signatures. She paused at the scene, Max now seated at Hannah's bedside, Ella leaning against his shoulder as he read aloud the words he'd written. Liam stood near the window, watching snow fall over the city, his reflection blurred against the glass. 4. People who 12 hours prior had been statistical anomalies, a CEO, a nurse, 2 children with no biological ties, now rearranged into a configuration that made the social worker adjust her forms. Max's voice tapered off as the nurse approached. Ella grabbed his sleeve, her small fingers bunching the fabric. Not a demand, just an anchor. The final illustration in the book showed their future selves walking away from the alley, their outlines growing brighter with each step. Fiction, for now. But beneath hospital fluorescence with discharge papers waiting, it felt possible enough to hold on to. The gift shop's tinny holiday music switched tracks, something about miracles and silent nights. In room 412, the real magic was quieter. The squeak of a teenager's sneakers shifting nervously, the crinkle of printer paper, a child exhaling like she could finally stop counting the days until she belonged somewhere. The discharge paperwork came stacked in triplicate. Hospital forms designed for nuclear families, foster placements, or state custody. Nothing accounted for a Fortune 500 CEO, a pediatric nurse, and 2 children who shared no last names but had started drawing joint family trees in the margins of intake sheets. Liam signed first, his usual signature, the rushed scrawl that approved million-dollar contracts, came out unnaturally neat this time. Each loop of the L carefully formed, the I dotted with an uncharacteristic precision. Hannah hesitated when the pen reached her. The tremble in her fingers had nothing to do with residual stroke weakness. This was the kind of shaking that came from signing away old certainties, the brittle security of knowing exactly how bad things could get. The social worker started to explain the temporary custody terms again, but Liam shook his head slightly. They'd been through this 3 times already. Ella sat cross-legged on the bed with Max's book in her lap, oblivious to the legal pivot happening around her. She turned a page, frowned at her own crayon additions, then looked up abruptly. "Are we going home with you?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Not tentative, not hopeful, just a child stating what she believed to be obvious. The hospital room held its breath. The beeping monitors, the squeaky-wheeled cart passing in the hall, even the social worker's pen hovering over the next blank line, all momentarily suspended. Liam had given boardroom presentations to hostile investors, but no amount of corporate training prepared him for this. His answer didn't come in bullet points or strategic hedges. "If you want to," he said. the words leaving his mouth before he could polish them. For as long as you want. The phrasing would have gotten him roasted. In a shareholder meeting, no timelines, no contingencies, just an open door. Hannah's exhale came out uneven. 15 years of single parenting dissolved in that breath. The nights working double shifts, the calculations between bus fare and cafeteria meals, the constant fear of one misstep, meaning child services at the door. The pen finally met paper, her signature sloping slightly left like someone leaning into a strong wind. Across the room, Max uncapped a marker and started sketching on Ella's cast. His design, a lopsided house with 4 stick figures, wouldn't win art awards. But the way he drew the tallest figure's arm around the smallest one's shoulders needed no explanation. Ella studied it, then leaned against him with the easy trust of someone who'd already decided where she belonged. Legal precedent suggested rich men didn't sign custody paperwork themselves. They sent lawyers and assistants to handle messy human transactions. Yet here Liam stood, tucking the forms into his breast pocket without passing them to an aide. The social worker noted his personal email, written clearly in the contact line, not some corporate address that would bounce to assistants. Nurses came to remove Hannah's IVs. The tape tugged at the thin skin of her forearm, leaving angry red marks. Ella winced in sympathy, reaching for her mother's free hand with the same protective instinct she'd shown in the alley. Outside, snow began falling again. Not the furious Christmas Eve blizzard from days prior, but gentler flakes melting on impact with the warm pavement. Hannah's few belongings fit into one plastic hospital bag. The blue coat, now missing 3 smiley face buttons. A wallet containing precisely $2 and an expired bus pass. And the envelope, the one with Claire's letter, kept safe through unknown storms. Ella carried it for her, the paper crinkling, slightly inside its makeshift book cover of Max's drawings. The wheelchair arrived as mandated by hospital policy. Hannah gripped the armrests like she might float away otherwise. The orderly started to push, but Liam stepped forward instead. Simple gestures carried weight here. Who steered, who followed, who held which doors open. As they turned toward the elevators, Max fell into step beside Ella, matching her shorter strides without comment. The lobby Christmas tree still stood, its lights blinking through thinning needles. A nurse waved at Ella from the front desk, one of the many who'd snuck her extra Jell-O cups during her stay. Outside, Liam's town car idled at the curb. Not the bulletproof limo he used for work functions, but the smaller one with the back seat that still had Max's old booster seat wedged in the corner. Liam opened the car door himself. No driver to do it for him. The leather seats smelled of citrus cleaner and faintly of the peppermint gum Max always chewed. Ella climbed in first, her sneakers barely leaving scuff marks. Then Hannah moving carefully, her fingers brushing the scar from her IV like she still couldn't believe this. Part was over. Max hesitated just before getting in. House or apartment? He asked like he was confirming dinner plans, not the roof over 4 people's heads. Liam looked at the rearview mirror, at the reflection of a woman gripping her daughter's hand and a child clutching a battered homemade book. Let's go home, he said. Not an address, not an asset. Just a word that had grown 3 sizes in 4 days. The car pulled away from the hospital awning, snowflakes dissolving on the windshield like they'd never been there at all. Earlier that morning, Max had drawn over the last page of Ella's book, a sketch of their mismatched quartet walking away from the alley. The dumpsters were still there, the snow still falling, but the figures grew brighter with each step. That afternoon, on Christmas Day, the car wove through streets aglow with leftover holiday cheer. Somewhere behind them, the alley stood empty. Somewhere ahead, mugs of too sweet hot cocoa steamed, in a kitchen none of them had seen yet. The townhouse's Christmas tree listed slightly to the left, its trunk refusing to straighten no matter how they adjusted the stand. Liam's decorator would have had a coronary. No designer ornaments, no curated color scheme. Just 7 feet of scraggly fur-shedding needles onto hardwood floors they'd chosen specifically for easy hospital wheelchair navigation. Ella's contributions came in bursts throughout the week. A lumpy clay star for the top, glazed in primary school art class. Paper snowflakes with uneven cuts that dangled stubbornly from one string. The most telling ornament wasn't festive at all. A piece of cardboard labeled Mommy's Hospital, in shaky print, arrows pointing to stick-figure beds. Hannah had run her thumb over that one for a full minute before hanging it near the back, where only they'd know it was there. Max brought down a box from his closet without comment. Inside lay 15 years of ornaments, each one documented in Claire's meticulous handwriting on the backs. He hesitated before extracting one. Lily's Angel, age forever. The glass had a faint crack running through one wing. When he hung it beside Ella's hospital drawing, the two decorations swung gently until their edges touched. Hannah's offering came last. The creased ribbon from her old nurse's badge tied in a loose bow with the ends trimmed unevenly. New Beginnings, she'd written on a tiny tag in medical shorthand. It wasn't until Liam lifted Ella to place it that he noticed the dates. Same month Lily was born, same month Claire died. Time folded in on itself under twinkle lights. The tree looked nothing like his penthouse showpieces. Whole sections lacked decorations where they couldn't reach. The lights clumped in one spot, tangled in another. Yet when Liam plugged them in that first night, the effect wasn't tragic, just alive. Light caught Hannah's laugh lines as she untangled a stubborn knot, glinted off Max's braces when he mock complained about Ella's uneven snowflakes, turned Ella's wide eyes into miniature kaleidoscopes. Psychologists note how traumatized families often rebuild through rituals. The precise way Max positioned Lily's Angel every time it got bumped. How Ella touched her hospital ornament each time she passed, like confirming its reality. Hannah's habit of straightening the nurse's ribbon whenever she walked by, tiny adjustments keeping their collective balance. Liam found himself taking fewer work calls in the evenings. The tree demanded attention, not in a showy way but in the quiet manner of imperfect things that lean where they shouldn't. One night, coming home late, he caught Hannah alone in its glow. She wasn't admiring decorations, just sitting with her palms upturned, absorbing warmth from the lights like they were something perishable. Christmas morning smelled of burnt pancake edges and pine needles, Ella's excited shrieks over Santa's footprints, Max's sneakers dusted with flour, mixed with the tree's soft clicking as it settled. Their gifts weren't lavish. Art supplies, scrubs that actually fit Hannah, a set of good cooking pans to replace the warped ones she'd brought in her single suitcase. The real exchange happened when Max silently handed Liam a small box. Inside lay an ornament, a miniature briefcase with Dad 3.0 painted clumsily on the side. The cracking paint job suggested Max's handiwork. Liam turned it over to find a second inscription, now with more family portraits. Ella insisted they take photos. Not the staged shots from Liam's corporate holidays, but messy snapshots where someone was always half out of frame. In one, Hannah's caught mid-laugh at whatever, Max whispered. In another, Liam's hand is blurry where he reached to steady Ella on the armrest. The tree presides in every shot, its lopsidedness unmistakable, its lights refracting through the glass angel and the nurse's ribbon and the cardboard hospital sign until everything softens at the edges. Later, pulling the plug before bed, Liam noticed something. From certain angles, the tree's gaps and clumps reshaped the light into patterns no designer could replicate. Each blank spot became its own kind of decoration, negative space holding memories not yet made. Ella's small voice piped up from the hallway. Best tree ever. Not a question, just a fact stated with the certainty of children who judge by warmth, not symmetry. Max groaned about pine needles in his socks. Hannah pretended not to wipe her eyes on her sleeve. And Liam, for once, didn't think about tomorrow's meetings. Just about how many Christmases it had taken to learn the difference between perfect and whole. Morning would come with pine needles tracked through every room. The cleanup would take weeks. Somewhere between untangling lights and finding the stand's water reservoir had leaked. They'd started something that couldn't be boxed up in January. A holiday built not around what shone brightest but what held together when the lights were off. The glow of streetlights filtered through the townhouse windows at 3:17 a.m., painting stripes across the hardwood floor. That's where Liam found Ella, Not in her bed, but pressed against the cold glass, her small frame wrapped in Hannah's blue scarf like armor. The rhythmic hitching of her shoulders gave her away before she spoke. "I dreamt the alley was hungry," she whispered, her fingers working the scarf's fabric like prayer beads. Trauma specialists note how children's nightmares often personify danger. Darkness becomes a pursuer. Isolation takes shape as a monster. Ella's version had teeth made of dumpster edges and breath like winter wind. She described it haltingly, the way kids recount bad dreams when they're not entirely sure what's real anymore. The details weren't from imagination alone. She remembered the exact number of steps between the alley's broken street lamp and the spot where Liam had found her. Floorboards creaked before Hannah appeared, already awake, already moving toward them with that stiff gait left over from hospital beds in stroke recovery. No words were needed. A routine had formed in their first weeks together. Ella in the middle, Hannah on her left, Liam on her right, their hands meeting over her like a bridge. Tonight, Ella's cold feet tucked under Liam's sweatshirt, while Hannah smoothed her hair with the steady hands of someone used to soothing in the dark. Research on childhood trauma shows how small rituals rewire the brain's fear pathways. The pressure of a hand on a back, the predictability of someone always coming, these become weights that keep nightmares from dragging a child under. Liam watched Hannah trace circles on Ella's palm, a technique pediatric nurses use to ground anxious patients. The realization hit him then. This was his first night watch. Not pacing outside a boardroom before a merger, but sitting vigil over a child's fragile peace. Ella's breathing slowed gradually, syncing with theirs, an unconscious mimicry that sleep studies say bonds caregivers and children. Her eyelashes fluttered as she fought sleep, afraid of what waited behind closed eyes. "Count the streetlights with me," Hannah murmured, pointing to the orange glows beyond the window. A distraction tactic from hospital shifts. Together they tallied lights until the numbers blurred into nonsense, until Ella's head grew heavy. Against Liam's arm, dawn came slowly, turning the windows from black to gray. The scarf remained clutched in Ella's fist, its smiley face buttons pressing creases into her palm. Somewhere outside, garbage trucks rumbled through the alley where this began. But here, in this quiet corner of the townhouse, 3 sets of breaths rose and fell in unison. Not the staccato rhythm of fear, but the slow tide of people who've learned to anchor each other. Hannah's fingers brushed Liam's wrist when she thought he was asleep. Just a fleeting contact, the kind that carries whole conversations. It spoke of emergency rooms and snowstorms and the surreal fact that their lives now intersected here, in this darkened living room, because a child had needed adults who wouldn't vanish by morning. Ella stirred as light touched her face. No screaming awake, no frantic disorientation. Just a slow blink at the 2 figures flanking her, then a sigh that seemed to release something she'd been holding since Christmas Eve. The scarf stayed tangled around her fingers, but her grip had loosened. A small victory, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. By the time the coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen, Ella was drawing at the coffee table, not the alley this time, but the streetlights they'd counted. "There's 14, she informed Liam matter-of-factly, as if this settled something. Hannah pressed a mug into his hand, her nurse's instincts overriding any pretense that he hadn't been awake all night. The kitchen clock ticked toward 7 a.m. Board meetings and shareholder calls awaited. But for now, Liam lingered in the dim living room, watching sunlight crawl across Ella's drawing. The streetlights looked nothing like the originals, just yellow blobs with stick rays. Yet she'd drawn them carefully, each one distinct, each one accounted for. No alley in sight. Just lights stretching all the way home. The glass doors of the corporate office hissed open to silent stares. Liam usually walked these halls alone, trailed only by assistants with tablets and urgent messages. Today, Ella's small fingers pressed crescents into his palm as she matched his stride, her winter boots squeaking on the polished floors. His executive assistant froze mid-sentence when she saw them, the color draining from her face as if witnessing a breach of some unspoken corporate law. Bring the Fisher-Price CEO set to conference room B, Liam told security, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lobby. Plastic toys weren't typically on the approved meeting supplies list, but neither were 6-year-olds. Studies on workplace norms show less than a fifth of top executives ever bring children into high-level meetings. The rules were about to change. Ella's whisper cut through the tension as elevator doors closed on a group of stunned VPs. "Are these your work friends?" The question, innocent and softly spoken, made 2 senior managers exchange glances. One actually smiled. Hannah hung back in her faded scrubs, her presence a quiet contrast to the tailored suits surrounding them. She watched Ella, the way she monitored vital signs, attentive but ready to intervene. Conference room B smelled of coffee and antibacterial wipes when Ella began distributing her crayon drawings as meeting notes. No one refused the construction paper handouts, though the CFO did hesitate before placing his beside the quarterly projections. Research on organizational behavior shows children's presence lowers workplace aggression by triggering subconscious caregiving instincts. The usual posturing over profit margins gave way to simpler language, clearer explanations. Liam noticed the shift first in his operations head, who stopped mid-spreadsheet to adjust Ella's crooked name label. Then in the general counsel, who asked permission before removing his jacket despite the overheated room. When Ella climbed onto Hannah's lap to add purple streaks to a pie chart, the CFO leaned forward, not to protest, but to offer a better marker. By lunchtime, 3 executives had abandoned the catered sandwiches to show Ella how the printer worked. Her giggle when it spat out her doodle in triplicate made the IT director stand taller. Hannah caught Liam's eye across the room, her expression unreadable as she watched a VP teach Ella to use the stapler. The CEO, who'd once measured success in shareholder reports, now tracked it in sticky fingerprints on glass office walls. The surprise came during closing remarks, when the normally reticent CFO cleared his throat. "Best Q4 review we've had in years," he admitted, tapping Ella's sunshine-filled spreadsheet overlay. No one mentioned the crayon smudges on the conference table, or how the usual tension had dissolved like sugar in warm tea. Ella fell asleep on the ride home, her head against the car window, one hand still clutching a mommy-approved orange highlighter. Liam watched the city blur past and wondered why he'd ever thought boardrooms needed more steel and less Play-Doh. The answer flickered in the rearview mirror. Hannah smoothing Ella's hair, her nurse's hands gentle even in rest. Domestic routines were already stitching their lives together, thread by ordinary thread. Saturday mornings became sacred in the townhouse, or at least the Saturdays when Hannah wasn't pulling overnight shifts at the hospital. The kitchen smelled of scorched butter and syrup by 8 a.m., evidence of Liam's determined attempts at pancakes. His first batch resembled geological layers, charred bottoms hiding doughy middles, but family therapists would have recognized the value in the mess. Cooking together builds nonverbal coordination, the kind that can't be faked. Max established his role early as the self-proclaimed pancake critic, donning imaginary glasses to inspect each offering. Lacking structural integrity, he'd declare while stealing bites, his act sending Ella into giggles violent enough to expel syrup from her nose. Hannah intervened with quiet corrections when smoke alarms threatened, flip when the bubbles pop, spoken like she was instructing interns on proper glove protocol. By week 3, Liam had mastered basic circles. By month 3, he produced recognizable Mickey Mouse shapes, though one ear always sagged. The real progress wasn't measurable in batter consistency. It showed in Ella's diminishing jumpiness when cabinet doors slammed, in how Max stopped hovering near the fridge like he expected the food supply to vanish. Cultural anthropologists note how meal rituals cement non-traditional families. This one had its own rules. Max always got the first pancake, his sacrificial tester duty. Ella drizzled syrup in precise spirals, and Liam took meticulous notes on Hannah's subtle cues, the way she tapped the spatula twice when the pan needed more butter. The syrup bottle became a relic of their evolution. Ella's early cautious drips gave way to exuberant glugs, her small fingerprints permanently smudging the label. Those same sticky marks later appeared on Liam's contract. Drafts, tiny proof that boardroom decisions now happened with a child in his lap. His junior associates started keeping wet wipes on hand, though they knew better than to comment. Hannah's favorite pancake somehow always landed on her plate at the perfect golden stage, a fact she pretended not to notice until Liam caught her smiling at it one morning. The exchange required no words, just two adults recognizing how far they'd come from alleyways and ICU vigils. Long afternoons often found them still at the table, maps spread between plates as Ella planned adventures requiring 3 subway transfers to obscure parks. Max pretended to grumble about these expeditions while secretly packing emergency snacks. Researchers could have studied the way 4 people who'd once orbited separate tragedies now moved in quiet sync. Hannah passing Band-Aids before scrapes happened, Liam learning to braid hair between conference calls. The miracle wasn't in the pancake shapes, though Ella cherished each lopsided elephant Liam painstakingly crafted. It was in the ordinary alchemy of flour and eggs becoming something more sustaining than food. The morning Ella looked up from drowning her Mickey Mouse in syrup and said, "Daddy, can we have these forever?" And no one corrected her accidental title. Not Max hiding a smirk behind his milk glass. Not Hannah suddenly busy wiping an already clean fork. Certainly not Liam, whose boardroom caliber composure cracked just enough to spill coffee on his sweatpants. "Promise," he said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with breakfast. The word hung over the syrup-stained table like the scent of warming batter. Ordinary, essential, impossible to fake. Outside, snow melted into slush. Inside, seasons changed more quietly. What began as a nurse, a CEO, and 2 wary kids became something without a proper name. Just 4 chairs reliably filled every Saturday. 4 voices debating whose turn it was to do dishes. 4 lives that no longer fit neatly into the boxes marked family or strangers. The next chapter would come in a fluorescent-lit classroom, where a teacher's simple question would make Liam realize how far they'd traveled from that frozen alley. But for now, there were pancakes to flip, syrup to wipe, and the sacred ritual of a Saturday morning that no one took for granted anymore. Hannah adjusted Liam's tie on the elementary school steps with clinical precision, her fingers smoothing the silk like it was bandage tape. The gesture betrayed more than she intended. Nurses don't fidget unless something's wrong. Across the hallway, laminated student artwork fluttered under air vents while Ella's teacher did a double-take at the unlikely pair approaching. A doughy CEO in a $5,000 suit and a pediatric nurse in discount store slacks. The tiny chairs in Ms. Rosen's classroom forced Liam's knees up awkwardly. Research on educational bias flashed through his mind. Studies showing teachers unconsciously favor nuclear family structures. The man who'd negotiated billion-dollar mergers now sat gripping a styrofoam cup of bad coffee, waiting to be judged on completely unfamiliar terms. The teacher opened Ella's folder carefully. "She draws you both often," Ms. Rosen said, spreading construction paper across the tiny table. The drawings showed varying versions of the same scene, 2 tall figures bookending a small one. In some, they held hands. In others, their combined silhouettes formed a shelter around the child. Developmental psychologists would have noted the recurring motif, safety through unity. Hannah's analysis of Ella's reading scores came rapid fire, each lag correlated to specific traumas. December absenteeism aligns with their first winter. Homeless, she explained, pointing to test dates. This dip here? Post-hospitalization nightmares. Ms. Rosen's pen hesitated over her notepad as the nurse broke down educational impacts with the same precision she'd used diagnosing an illness. Liam expected questions about math gaps or recess behavior, not the soft inquiry that came next. "And you are?" Ms. Rosen asked carefully, eyes flickering between adults who shared no last names, no obvious ties beyond this child. The answer left Liam's mouth before his brain could vet it. Her parents, not guardians, not caretakers. The word felt simultaneously too small and impossibly large, like trying to contain an ocean in cupped hands. Across the table, Hannah's intake of breath was barely audible, but her fingers stopped tracing Ella's spelling tests mid-sentence. Sociologists track how schools adapt to non-traditional families. Ms. Rosen's next actions became a case study in quiet acceptance. She modified the emergency contact form without comment, adding both their names to the same line. Her follow-up questions assumed shared responsibility. Who would help with the science project? Who'd attend the winter concert? The unspoken message came through clearly. This configuration required no explanation here. The meeting's true revelation came in closing remarks. "Ella wrote this yesterday," Ms. Rosen said, sliding over a journal page. The childish scrawl described an assignment about heroes. Most kids chose firefighters or athletes. Ella's entry began, "My mom is a nurse who fixes kids in the middle of nights. My dad carries people home when they're lost. No alley trauma, no hospital fears. Just a child's simple distillation of their essences." Hannah's throat worked silently as she read. Liam realized with sudden clarity how thoroughly their roles had inverted. The man who'd once measured worth in quarterly profits now treasured a stained coffee cup because Ella had drawn a smiley face on it. The woman who'd spent years being professionally invisible now sat fully seen through a child's eyes. They exited past the bulletin board displaying student family photos. Ella's submission stood out. A laminated copy of Max's alley sketch with 4 figures now, not 3. Someone had added glitter to the streetlight beams. In the margin, Ella's careful printing explained, "This is when my family started." The afternoon sun slanted across the parking lot as they walked to the car. Hannah's shoulder brushed Liam's, not quite a lean, just momentary contact. Neither mentioned the forms now locked in the school's office where the word parents connected them forever in official records. 1 year ago, they'd been strangers bound only by a child's desperate choice that holiday night. Now Ella's backpack swung between them, heavy with homework and half-finished drawings. Somewhere inside was the journal entry Liam couldn't forget. "Home smells like pancakes and the soap from Mom's hospital and Daddy's phone buzzing, with important stuff he ignores to help me sound out words." The car doors thunked shut, sealing them in temporary quiet. Hannah reached for the seatbelt with hands that had once kept a newborn alive, and now traced spelling words nightly. Liam adjusted the rearview mirror out of habit, catching sight of Ella's empty booster seat. One ordinary school conference had made it suddenly clear. The rescue hadn't been Liam finding Ella in that alley. It was Ella leading them all, back to something none of them realized they'd lost. Across town, a teacher filed away notes from the strangest parent conference of her career. 3 names now officially linked in school records, all because a little girl refused to draw her family any other way. 3:70. The digital thermometer's reading flashed like a warning light in the dim bedroom. Ella's post-vaccination fever had spiked fast, her small body radiating heat under the piled blankets. Liam stood frozen near the doorway, his usual boardroom commands useless here. He watched Hannah shift into nurse mode with terrifying efficiency, her hands checking pulse points while rattling off medication dosages from memory. Medical journals note how crisis clarifies caregiving roles faster than any legal paperwork. Hannah moved through the room like a surgeon. Ice packs positioned at pressure points, a timer set for 30-minute checks, damp cloths folded precisely for maximum cooling. Her instructions came clipped and clear. "Hold this here. Count her breaths." Liam followed each order like a nervous intern, his usual executive certainty reduced to basic motions under her calm direction. Max appeared at 2:14 a.m. bearing freezer, pops, and an ancient dinosaur-shaped thermometer. Teenagers aren't supposed to know where pediatric supplies are kept, but he produced them without being asked. His casual offer, "The purple ones stay down better," spoke of hard-earned experience. Liam noticed how Max positioned himself near Ella's feet, his presence steady but not crowding. A sibling's instinctive balance between concern and giving space. The worst hours passed in minute-by-minute increments. The cool compresses, the medication fights, Ella's weak protests that she wasn't cold despite violent shivering. Hannah's nurse voice never wavered, even when Ella's fingers dug into her scrubs hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. Researchers claim non-biological caregivers bond deepest during illness. Sleepless nights rewriting definitions of family faster than court orders ever could. Morning light found the crisis past. Ella slept finally, her breathing even beneath the light sheet. Liam discovered Hannah slumped in the rocking chair, her forehead resting against Ella's mattress edge. She hadn't changed position in hours. One hand still cradling Ella's shoulder, the other loosely gripping a discarded thermometer. His suit jacket lay draped over them both, its Italian wool now sweat-stained and wrinkled beyond repair. Pediatricians note how fevered children often cling to caregivers with unusual strength. Ella's fingers remained fisted in Hannah's scrub, top even in sleep, the fabric stretched out of shape beyond recognition. Liam hesitated before removing the melting ice pack from Hannah's limp hand, a gesture that felt strangely intimate, like disarming a soldier who'd fought too long. The bathroom mirror showed the night's toll when he splashed water on his face. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, stubble that hadn't existed yesterday. His phone buzzed with 12 missed calls from the office. None from the adoption agency, though their home study loomed next week. Paperwork couldn't capture moments like these. The silent collaborations in dark rooms, the way 4 people become family through shared watches and purple freezer pops. Liam found Max asleep at the kitchen table, his forehead pillowed on his crossed arms. The grocery list beside him said only, Pedialyte Pops, Children's Tylenol, Gatorade. Adult handwriting above had added, coffee, pizza rolls, thank Max for being amazing. The sight cracked something open in Liam's chest, the ordinary miracle of being outnumbered by people who know exactly what the household needs before he does. Ella woke briefly around noon, her voice hoarse but coherent. Did I miss school? She asked, blinking at Hannah still in yesterday's scrubs. When Hannah shook her head, Ella's fingers plucked weakly at her sleeve. You stayed. Not a question, just a quiet confirmation of something she'd once doubted. Hannah smoothed damp hair from Ella's forehead with the same motion she'd used checking a patient's temperature. Always, she said, the word simple and absolute. Liam recognized the truth in it. The same way he knew Max would wake soon asking for triple pepperoni, the same way he understood this fever watch had rewritten them all. Later, sorting laundry, he'd find Ella's hospital bracelet tangled in his jacket pocket. The thin plastic had left marks on her wrist, temporary imprints that would fade by morning, not so different from the marks they'd all left on each other these past months. Invisible most days, except when the light hit just right. The adoption papers would arrive on schedule, full of legal jargon and notarized signatures, but the real contract had been signed in sweat and freezer pops and the quiet understanding that some bonds don't need ceremony, just someone to count breaths with you through the long nights. Their caseworker would eventually comment on how easily they all slipped into familial roles during the home visit. She wouldn't see the fever charts or melted ice packs behind their polished presentation. But months from now, when Ella caught another virus, they'd fall into place again without discussion. Hannah taking vitals, Max fetching comfort foods, Liam holding the basin. A choreography earned, not given. The thermometer beeped softly from its charging dock on the bedside table, resetting for next time. Because there would always be a next time. More fevers, more scares, more chances to prove what they'd become that snowy Christmas. Not perfect. Just present. Always. Liam knelt by the cardboard box he'd pulled from under Hannah's bed. Dust motes swirled in the late afternoon light as he lifted the lid. He expected old tax files or uniforms. Instead, his fingers brushed against a small manila envelope. The photo slipped out first. 15 years hadn't faded the image. Hannah in blue scrubs, her smile tired but warm as she cradled a newborn swaddled in pink. Beside her, propped up on hospital pillows, Claire beamed with the exhausted radiance of new motherhood. The time. Stamp on the corner placed at 3 hours before the hemorrhage, before monitors started shrieking, before the last time he'd held his wife's hand. Hannah's voice came from the doorway. They let me hold Lily while Claire rested. Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her sweater. I kept that because it was her last happy day. The words hung between them, heavier than the photo paper in Liam's hands. Ella chose that moment to barrel into the room, homework papers fluttering. "Dad, Max won't help with my—" She froze when she saw the image Liam held. Her small finger tapped the glassine surface. "That's me?" The resemblance was undeniable. Same widow's peak, same stubborn chin. But it wasn't Ella in that photo. It was Lily, the daughter who'd lived 19 minutes, the daughter Claire never got to take home. Liam's throat tightened as he traced the edge of the picture. Therapists call these linking objects, everyday items that tether us to loss. A watch stopped at the time of death, a voicemail saved for decades. For Hannah, it had been this single square of photographic paper, hidden away like a sacred relic. Hannah knelt beside Ella. "That's a baby I helped take care of a long time ago," she said. Her voice only wavered slightly. "She looked like you, didn't she?" Ella studied the image with a child's solemn focus. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for Hannah's hand and placed it over Liam's on the photograph. 3. Hands pressed together over 3 faces frozen in time. Research shows traumatic memories often get stored differently in the brain. Vivid, fragmented, surfacing at unexpected moments. That's why people keep these physical anchors, to control when the memories come, to choose the moment they face them. Liam realized why Hannah had preserved this particular image. Not the emergency that came later, not the grief. Just one quiet hour where 2 mothers, one nursing, one nurse, had shared the weight of new life. The envelope held more. A hospital wristband with baby girl Carter smudged but legible. A dried flower from the bouquet Claire had insisted on bringing to her own delivery. And at the very bottom, a slip of paper with Claire's handwriting. Tell Liam the lullaby worked. He remembered that lullaby, the off-key one he'd hummed when Claire couldn't sleep during her pregnancy. The same one he'd found himself singing to Ella during her nightmares. Hannah's eyes were bright. "I tried to find you after, but you'd left the city. By the time I tracked down your office, you were married again." Ella tugged the photo, gently from Liam's grip. "Can we put this on the fridge?" she asked. "Next to my school picture?" Later, Liam would notice how naturally Hannah had shifted her weight toward him when Ella asked that question. How his own arm had brushed against hers as they'd stood to follow Ella down the hall. How the photo looked less like a relic of loss and more like a bridge between past and present when framed by a child's crayon drawings on the refrigerator door. The box under the bed was empty now, its contents no longer hidden. Hannah chose the bench with care, the one directly facing Claire's memorial plaque by the pond. The brass inscription gleamed in the afternoon light, smoothed by years of visitors' touches. Liam ran his thumb over the letters now, tracing the familiar dates. "She made me promise to be happy," he admitted. The words felt both lighter and heavier spoken aloud. Grief psychologists note how last instructions transform over time, from burdens to compass points. Liam had interpreted his vow as moving forward, building companies, raising Max. Never as an invitation to heal through helping a child who wasn't his. Hannah's confession came quietly, her gaze on the ducks skimming the pond's surface. "After my husband died, nursing was all I had left." The details emerged piecemeal. A car accident 5 years back, an ER nurse who'd been the patient that time, the way pediatric shifts became an escape from an empty apartment. Liam recognized the coping mechanism. He'd buried himself in work the same way. Across the water, Max demonstrated proper bread-throwing technique to Ella. Her laughter carried clearly, bouncing off the pond's surface like skipped stones. The sound seemed to startle Hannah slightly, perhaps realizing how long it had been since she'd heard her daughter laugh so freely. Liam studied the memorial plaque again. Claire's smiling face in the photo inset hadn't aged a day. He wondered what she'd think of this fractured family they'd assembled from alleyway rescues and hospital vigils. The thought no longer brought the old stab of guilt, just a quiet curiosity. Hannah's hand settled over his where it rested on the bench. Neither moved away. The contact wasn't romantic, not exactly, More like two survivors recognizing each other across no man's land. Social science shows shared loss accelerates intimacy. There's no small talk necessary when someone already understands your deepest wounds. Ella's sneaker slipped on the muddy bank. Both adults half rose instinctively before Max caught her elbow with practiced ease. The sight made Liam exhale. Proof. Their cobbled-together family had its own safety nets now. "We never got to take Lily home," Liam said suddenly. The past tense felt foreign even now. Hannah's fingers tightened fractionally on his. The nurse who'd handed him his swaddled daughter that terrible night now sat beside him years later. Her own child chasing ducks with his son. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. Their silence held no corporate calculation, no strategic positioning. Just two people who'd learned the hard way that some promises, to the dying, to the living, require reinterpretation across decades. Liam finally understood Claire's last request differently now. Not as a mandate to avoid grief, but permission to find unexpected joy nonetheless. Ella came running back, her hands full of soggy breadcrumbs. "Max says ducks have teeth on their tongues," she announced, breathless. Hannah produced a tissue from her pocket on reflex, catching the worst of the pond water before it dripped on Ella's jacket. The motion was so maternal it made Liam's chest ache. Later, walking back to the car, Ella swung between them, her grip alternating between their hands with each step. Max trailed behind, snapping photos of their silhouettes against the setting sun. The images would show 4 figures strolling home, 3 holding hands, 1 documenting the moment. Not a traditional family. Just people who'd promised to keep each other safe. The adoption papers would arrive soon, making legal what they'd already known through sleepless nights and pancake breakfasts. But today, by a pond with a memorial bench, something quieter had shifted. Not a new beginning exactly. More like a long overdue acknowledgement that love sometimes arrives in pieces, assembled across years by hands that know both loss and unexpected grace. Ella squeezed his hand harder as they reached the parking lot. Liam squeezed back once, twice, a silent code they'd developed for "I'm here." Ahead of them, Hannah adjusted her purse strap with her free hand. Her shoulders relaxed in a way photos from last winter never showed. The plaque behind them caught the last of the sunlight, gleaming briefly before shadows lengthened across its surface. Claire's smiling face seemed to watch them go, her inscription now reading differently than it had an hour before. Not an ending, just a single thread in the larger story they were all still weaving together. The courthouse pen felt unfamiliar in Liam's grip, lighter than his Mont Blanc, cheaper than the kind he used to sign million-dollar deals. It hovered over the line marked "Father." Across the table, Hannah's hand shook slightly as she signed "Mother," with her nurse's precise lettering. The clerk blinked at their simultaneous signatures, the kind of look usually reserved for lottery winners or accident survivors. Family court sees few CEO petitioners for kinship adoption, even fewer where the biological mother sits beside him signing matching paperwork. The judge adjusted her glasses, studying the unusual quartet: a businessman, a nurse, a sulky teenager, and the small girl kicking her feet against the chair legs. Ella's scuffed Mary Janes left faint marks on the polished wood, a detail Liam would normally correct. Today he let it pass. Max's gift came during the recess. He unfurled a redrawn family tree across the bench, its branches spreading wide to include all 4 of them plus 2 small leaves labeled Claire and Lily. Ella traced the connections with a sticky finger that had earlier explored a Jolly Rancher wrapper. "See?" she told the social worker. "I have 2 moms and 2 dads now." The woman's pen stalled mid-form. Developmental psychologists track how legal recognition validates a child's sense of belonging. Liam saw it in the way Ella stood taller when the judge called her Miss Carter Wills, in how she carefully folded her old hospital bracelet into the trash after the ruling. Documentation mattered, not to courts or schools, but to the girl who'd once slept between dumpsters. The judge's final question was procedural. "Do you understand what adoption means, Ella?" The room expected a child's rambling answer. They got 4 words delivered with courtroom clarity. "They chose me. Not pity. Not obligation. A conscious selection, like the library books she treasured, or the mismatched socks she insisted on wearing. Legal scholars note rising intentional family cases post-crisis, units formed through circumstance rather than blood. The clerk stamped their forms with a thud that echoed oddly in the high-ceilinged room. Ella grabbed Liam's hand with her right, Hannah's with her left, creating an unbroken chain from one parent to the other. Max rolled his eyes but adjusted his stance to complete the circle. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the courthouse steps. Ella paused halfway down, her fingers working at something in her pocket. The old photo from Hannah's box emerged. The one of Claire holding newborn Lily with Hannah standing guard in scrubs. Ella placed it carefully beside the new adoption certificate in her backpack, two pieces of paper that shouldn't have belonged together but now did. Hannah's breath caught. When she saw, Liam felt the shift, not just in legal status but in some deeper reckoning. The man who'd built empires on contractual obligations now found himself bound by a child's stubborn insistence that love could bridge 15 years and 2 irreparable losses. The car ride home smelled of fast food fries and Max's grape soda. Ella chattered about changing her school folder to match her new last name, while Hannah smoothed the creases from the adoption papers with shaking hands. At a red light, Liam caught her wiping her eyes with her sleeve. The same motion he'd seen, her use after difficult night shifts. Max broke the silence from the back seat. So who tells her Santa isn't real? Ella's indignant shriek drowned out the GPS. Hannah laughed into her hands. The sound was rough, unpracticed, the kind that comes after years of insufficient use. That night, Liam found Ella's old hospital bracelet in the trash. He fished it out, washed the stickiness away, and tucked it into his desk drawer beside Max's first lost tooth and Lily's ultrasound photo. Artifacts of fatherhood, regardless of biology. Hannah appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs. Her scrubs had flour on them, attempted cookies with Ella after dinner. They sipped in comfortable silence, watching through the window as Max taught Ella to ride a bike in their pajamas. The training wheels screeched against concrete. "Claire would have liked you," Liam said finally. The admission surprised them both. Hannah's mug clicked against the windowsill. She did. Not speculation. Simple fact. The photo in Ella's backpack proved it. Upstairs, Ella's excited footsteps shook the ceiling. The adoption papers lay on the kitchen table, already bearing smudges and a grape juice ring from dinner. Properly filed, but more importantly, lived in. Like all the best family documents, their story would come full circle soon, on a snowy anniversary at the alley where it began. But tonight, in this quiet kitchen with training wheels squealing outside, one truth stood clear. Some choices aren't made in courtrooms or crisis moments. They're made in daily acts, packing school lunches, bandaging scraped knees, keeping vigil during fevers. The legal paperwork just catches up to what hearts have already decided. Ella burst in, pigtails swinging, demanding cocoa despite the late hour. Hannah reached for the milk without hesitation. Liam watched them move around each other, mother and daughter stepping in perfect sync around their shared kitchen. No more hesitation about whose job it was to say yes or no, comfort or redirect. Just the easy rhythm of people who'd stopped counting themselves as separate. The judge's stamp had made it official, but Ella's 4 words in that courtroom, "They chose me," had already told the whole story. The snow fell differently this Christmas Eve, softer, gentler than the biting flakes from a year ago. 4 figures stood in the alley where only 2 had met. Urban renewal stats claim most crisis sites fade unmarked into the city's fabric. This one still smelled of damp brick and old garbage, though someone had repainted the dumpsters since last winter. Ella knelt between them, her mittens grating against the pavement as she placed a votive candle in the exact spot she'd once curled up shaking. "For other lost kids," she announced. The flame guttered but held. Hannah's nurse instincts took over. She scanned for syringe caps, checked the ice patches, the habits of someone who'd treated too many sidewalk hypothermia cases. Her fingers brushed Ella's hoodie strings, straightening them like vital sign monitors. Max sketched from the alley's mouth, his charcoal capturing what cameras couldn't, the way Ella's candlelight cast long shadows up the brickwork. How Liam's expensive shoes stood in the same sludge that once ruined his suit. Psychologists say trauma revisitation helps rewrite memories when done right. The drawing wouldn't show fear. Just 4 figures haloed in light, their breath mingling in the cold air. Liam's gloved hand found the dumpster's edge, same spot he'd leaned on that night, same metallic chill seeping through fabric. 12 months ago, this alley held only loss. Now Ella's laugh bounced off the walls as Max pretended to document her historic landmark. The transformation wasn't miraculous, just a series of small choices, scarf offerings, signed papers, Saturday pancakes, that accumulate, like snowfall until the landscape changes completely. "This is where we became us," Liam said, more to himself than anyone. The city noise swallowed most of it, but Ella heard. Her mitten found his palm with the same reflexive grip from that first night. Only now her fingers didn't shake. Now, she knew whose hand she held. Hannah's phone flashlight illuminated something near the dumpster. Ella's lost shoe, or one just like it, left behind by some other child. She picked it up, turned it over, then set it carefully beside the candle. No words needed. The message was clear enough. Keep walking. Someone's waiting. Studies on closure note how physical markers help. A candle, a photo, a shoe placed just so. Ella's offering wasn't elaborate. Neither was Max's sketch, now smudged at the edges where he'd blended shadows into something softer. They'd all needed this return, though only Ella had said it outright. The snow picked up as they left. Behind them, the candle flickered but didn't go out. Its tiny glow reflected in the puddles, multiplying the light against the dirty pavement. Passing strangers would assume it marked a death. They weren't entirely wrong, just incomplete. Their townhouse glowed when they returned, its lopsided tree visible through the front window. Ella's hands left damp prints on the doorknob as she burst in, already chattering about new ornaments. The adoption certificate hung framed beside Max's old drawings, legal proof of what they'd built since last winter's longest night. Liam lingered on the threshold, watching Hannah shake snow from her coat with the same efficiency she used, checking IV drips. Max flopped onto the couch, already critiquing Ella's ornament-hanging technique. The scene shouldn't have been possible. Not after all they'd lost. Not after alleyways and hospital vigils and grief that could have swallowed them whole. Yet here they stood, 4 people who'd been given the rarest of second chances. Not to rewrite the past, just to prove that sometimes, against all odds, light finds its way through cracks in the world. That sometimes, if you're very lucky, the family you need finds you right when you've stopped believing it exists. The votive in the alley would burn out eventually. The drawings would fade, the paperwork yellow with age. But tonight, as snow gathered on their windowsills and mismatched laughter filled the rooms, one truth remained brighter than any candle. Some rescues don't end. They just change shape year after year into something resembling home. The real story wasn't the alley or the adoption papers. It was the burned pancake mornings, the shoe left beside a candle, the way Ella called them parents before the eyes, ink dried. Love built this family one ordinary moment at a time. Max sketching fever charts instead of cityscapes, Hannah humming Claire's lullaby without realizing, Liam's phone buzzing unanswered during parent-teacher conferences. The miracle wasn't in the dramatic rescue. It was in the quiet choice to stay, through nightmares and mediocre school plays, through shoe-shopping tantrums and stomach bugs, to build something from scraps of grief and stubborn hope. If their story moved you, like and subscribe for more real-life miracles.